My name is Carrie Altenburn. I'm a coordinator for the Lawrence Douglas County Community Remembrance Project Coalition. There's a number of coalition organizations represented here, along with many individuals who are interested in this extremely important day for Lawrence history. A year ago today, we dedicated the lynching marker, the marker that commemorates, memorializes the hanging by a Lawrence mob of Isaac King, George Robertson, and Peter Vinegar. Margaret was Peter's daughter, and she was not treated right by the citizens of Lawrence after the lynching, and that's why the marker's up there.
Let's pray. So real talk, God, our hearts are made to bleed by every thoughtless word and deed that makes it necessary for us to do this commemoration ceremony. And yet, we are excited that you are a God who can break through history and right wrongs. We are excited that you are a God who can bring people together to make sure that voices that have been silenced will finally be heard. So today, God, as we lift our voices, we sing, we praise, we mourn, we celebrate, and we pledge that as much as in us lies, this won't happen again. In Jesus' name, amen.
I'm Ursula Miner, President of Lawrence Branch Naacp. The Margaret for Margaret Vinegar reflects our community's ongoing commitment to truth-telling and racial justice. This marker, while second, is no afterthought. Researching and learning Margaret's history showed just how important a marker of this kind is. Black women were killed in the same lynchings that took the lives of black men, but they were more likely to suffer the trauma of sexual violence. That sexual violence, in Margaret's case, like so many other black women, came at the hands of white men. Black women had no legal means to resist and protect themselves from sexual assault. This marker, installed through community work and dialogue, represents the accomplishments of our work done so far and stands as a reminder of the community's continuing efforts to deal with painful racial history truthfully. Margaret was a 14-year-old black girl who was sexually assaulted by an older white man during a time when black women were scared to stop white man's advances for fear of their lives and their families. Ultimately, that fear was warranted. 3 black men were hanged, and Margaret was sentenced to prison, where she died. You have the opportunity today to speak up and use your voice when Margaret did not. In honor of Margaret Vinegar, speak up when you see something happening, say something when you see something wrong. Join a civil rights organization, join a city board, make sure you vote, and do something. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Caitlin Sedich, and I am a member of the Youth Council.
And I'm Mimi Stevenson, and I'm the treasurer for the Youth Council. Today, we are grateful for the opportunity to speak here. Today marks the 141st anniversary of the lynching of Margaret. Herself was only 14 when she was wrongfully put in jail, and 20 when she passed away from tuberculosis in prison. Her incarceration took away any opportunity from her as she was stripped from her autonomy in more ways than one. The injustice that she experienced was far from abnormal, but her story marks an era where people were scared to speak out against the ruling and injustice. Today, we hope that we can do the right thing as to mitigate the impacts of past racial injustice and how we perceive people in situations in the future.
We, as the youth branch of the NAACP, want to ensure people of Margaret's age have equitable opportunities across Lawrence, regardless of race, age, gender, or any societal implication that could hold them back. While the actions have become less physical and targeted, as in Margaret's era, they still leave profound impacts on today's youth. Our founder and president, Wendell Kamuri, was and is a victim of hurtful comments and derogatory language, but she decided to take the hate and put it into something where change could prosper. So far, we have been able to reach out to elementary students in the community, host a chili feed, and open our arms to the stories of women and gender non-conforming peoples in the local area. Wendell is the reason we are here, but Margaret is the reason all of us are here now together. We are grateful to have been asked to speak today, and we will continue to hold Margaret in our hearts as we create change and prevent others from going through what she had to endure. Through the work of the Youth Council and the greater Lawrence community, we hope to share her story and commemorate her life with you today. Thank you.
Good evening and welcome everybody. I'm glad to be here tonight. So for about the last 3+ years, our coalition has been working to bring the truth to this heinous event of our history. As is indicated, it occurred 141 years ago in June of 1882. This event tonight represents the last dedication commemorating those who were wrongfully hanged and jailed. In October 2021, the coalition conducted a soil sample project in collaboration with the Equal Justice Institute, where we collected soil samples near the hanging site of the victims. The samples are being stored in perpetuity at the Equal Justice Institute Center in Montgomery, Alabama, and at our own Watkins Museum. In June of 2022, as Carrie indicated, we dedicated a marker at City Hall commemorating those who were wrongfully hanged. And tonight, we commemorate Margaret Sis Vinegar, who, as you know, is the young black child who was sexually assaulted and whose father, Pete Vinegar, and 2 friends were hanged without trial from the Kaw River Bridge by a mob of white men for the sole act of trying to protect and defend her. This marker speaks the truth about that sexual assault and the wrongful conviction and imprisonment of Margaret. The coalition has diligently worked to shine the light on the truth and find a pathway to healing. For this phase of our project, we offer you an opportunity to join us in memorializing Margaret and to summon the courage to have those truthful conversations that will work to set us free. Thank you.
Good evening. I will be brief because there are far more important voices for us to hear from today. However, the issue of sexual violence is an important one on this occasion if we are to adequately address the context of this tragedy. We know that historically and still today, sexual violence has been used to further marginalize and terrorize minoritized communities, including and especially Black women, which is the reason that we are here today. War crimes and sex crimes are often one and the same, and yet we continue to fail to take sex crimes seriously. Whether they occur in a war or as domestic terrorism against minoritized people based on race, sexual orientation, gender identity, poverty status, and other identities that don't fall into cis, het, white, middle class social normativity. This occurs far too frequently. Too often, we fail to adequately respond when sexual violence is used as a tool for oppression. And we punish those who would seek their own justice when systems and communities continuously fail to protect them. We punish those who seek the only resolution they can see available to them. Sexual violence is an intrinsic piece of what happened to Margaret and the events that unfolded afterward. Even today, this is not news to us. We know that today, at least 57% of rapists are white. None of United States Indigenous women will be raped in their lifetime. Margaret did not deserve to be raped. She did not deserve to die in prison. No person should be punished for crimes committed against them. For more than 50 years, the Care Center has worked to ensure that the horrific legacy of sexual violence is eradicated in Lawrence and Douglas County. This dedication will help raise awareness of the devastating impact of sexual violence, and Margaret's life will be remembered and serve as a reminder that all Black women deserve physical, sexual, emotional safety, and Lawrence has not always been a place where that existed. Perhaps this will be a sign for others that the time for change is long overdue.
Well, first I want to say I appreciate being allowed to participate in this ceremony. It's very, I'm honored to be able to speak. And it's very meaningful to me as a community member and also as someone who is a judge here in this community. I was asked to speak today, of course, as a representative of our judicial system. And the reason for that is that our judicial system was part of the horrible injustice that Margaret Vinegar suffered. As I thought of what to say, I was tempted to try to think about all the ways we're better and all the things that have been done to try to be more positive and how far we've come. But I don't think that's what we should do today. I'm reminded of the words that James Baldwin wrote. He wrote, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." And today is a day to face our history. It's a time to look squarely and unflinchingly at the reality of what our system, our community, our society, and individual citizens of this county did to Margaret Vinegar. I think we should also pause to remember that the fact that Margaret Vinegar died in prison was not illegal vigilantism, like the lynching that happened to Pete Vinegar and Isaac King and George Robertson. I think it's important to remember that much of what happened and was done to Margaret Vinegar was done under the law, in a courtroom, following an orderly process. The judge in Margaret Vinegar's case took an oath to follow the Constitution. The jurors who sat in judgment of her took an oath to follow the law, just like jurors do today. But despite those oaths to do justice, to follow the law, to find the truth, our system produced a grave evil. And the truth is, as you all know, that this was not the first injustice that involved our justice system, and it wasn't the last. My hope is that Margaret Vinegar's memory causes us all to rededicate ourselves, to do everything we can to erase the evils of racism and sexism and sexual violence from our community and our world. We cannot change what was done to Margaret Vinegar, but if we face it honestly, which is what we're here to do today, I think we can play some small role in changing the racism and sexism that exploited her, imprisoned her, and treated Margaret as if her life were unimportant. So my hope is that Margaret's memory will cause us to face our past and use it to bring about a better future. Thank you.
Good day, everyone. Hope you can see me. I'm kind of short. Well, I'm Sierra Tubals. I'm Oglala Lakota from the Oglala Sioux tribe of the Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. That's where I'm originally from. I am honored to speak on behalf of the Indigenous Community Center, ICC, and our Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls Two-Spirit, and Trans chapter. Before I speak on our Indigenous issues we face that I was asked to speak on, I would like to first thank the Lawrence Douglas County Community Remembrance Project Coalition for inviting ICC to be a part of this wonderful ceremony dedicated to Margaret Vinegar. To be honest though, I had not heard about Miss Vinegar until recently, until they reached out to me, and that brought up when I first learned about it, I got angry. I got angry because of what had happened to her and the 3 black men, that this should never have happened. I got angry about this being just another reminder of the United States government had purposely, with the tying this in with Black and Indigenous solidarity. I do want to bring up the points of that European settler colonialism of the United States government and purposely leaving out this history specifically, but also Native American history. And in 1882, if we put this all in perspective, this was 2 years before what would become the Haskell Indian Nations University. Just 2 years before, if you think about this, this is Osage, Kakansa land that this act happened, or this tragedy had happened just 2 years before, and this was during the boarding school era, if you think about that. That was, and then there was also assimilation allotment act that was happening, and there was still Native, specifically my tribe up in South Dakota, it was 7 years before the Wounded Knee Massacre. Putting that all in perspective, the history there, there was a lot going on in that time. It was, genocide was still happening with Native Americans, but Black people were still being enslaved and being killed as well. So, that's putting that all in perspective with history. Putting that all in history or in perspective that this is, with this, knowing this history, that's probably why we had a lot of our Black and Indigenous leaders had come together in the 1960s and the 70s, the importance of that solidarity, how we face similar struggles in different ways though. So, why we asked God to speak to this, how it all relates, is with Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, Two-Spirit. As our name suggests, we are, well, let me take a step back. With the Indigenous Community Center, ICC, we established ourselves to be a separate entity separate from Haskell Indian Nations University, because some of you may assume that, if they're Native, they must have gone to Haskell. Well, not everyone has, right? There are Natives that go to KU, and Natives, we just exist. We just exist everywhere, and we're just here. So, providing the space for Indigenous people. Anyone that identifies Indigenous, whether they are Native American, Black, white, we're providing that space. And so when why we created a chapter, and we called ourselves the acronym MMIWG2ST, standing for Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women, Girls, Two-Spirit, Trans. I know it's a long acronym, but we started because this movement has existed for a long periods of time, and as I mentioned with history, Pocahontas, everyone knows who Pocahontas was. She was actually one of the first MMIW statistic. And so with this movement, when we started 2 years ago, bringing this movement here to Lawrence. Even though we don't have any active cases here in Lawrence specifically, it's important that we raise awareness on this issue because it could happen here, and we don't want that to happen here. And it's happening everywhere else. Sorry, that's my timer. It's supposed to be 5 minutes, but if I may go on just a little bit longer. Okay. It's hard to speak on everything under 5 minutes. So why we bring it here? We want to raise awareness because statistics show that Indigenous women or girls plus murdered at 10 times higher than all the other ethnicities, or it's a third leading cause of death for Indigenous women according to the Center for Disease Control. I mean, there's plenty of stats out there that show it's high, but in general, it's high for all non-white women. So it's high for Black women as well. And believe it or not, there are Black women that are also going missing and murdered, and not everyone's talking about that either. So I know with the MMIW movement, we do speak just specifically on Native Americans, but we got to think about it too. We have relatives who are mixed Black, so we talk about also our Afro-Indigenous relatives that may have gone missing or they're murdered. So MMIWG2ST, 2 years ago we started, but we're part of a whole entire Texas, Oklahoma, and Kansas coalition. And we also were part of the planning committee that started the Actions for Justice Week, and we just had our second annual event this past May that coincides with the National Awareness Day, and Lawrence being the first city to proclaim MMIW+, and we were the first city in Kansas to do that. So I know some of you were there for that historic moment, Mayor. And then Kansas recently, the entire state, Governor Kelly signed in a proclamation just end of April. So I mean, there's some progress there as far as raising awareness there. But I mean, we have a long ways to go, and bring it all back here to Margaret. You know, I do appreciate that ICC or MMI W2D2ST chapter was invited to come speak, because it all it all relates. That, you know, the importance of Black and Indigenous solidarity, but also the importance of having our allies, so that way we can, you know, grow, raise more awareness, and that we are speaking truth to the history, not even here in Lawrence, but just overall in the United States. So, Pilamaya, thank you.
Michaela Clark is not able to be with us today. She couldn't make arrangements to get here. She's the Columbia University Justice Lab and formerly with the Equal Justice Initiative. And Michaela is the prime reason that we have this marker. She worked for the Equal Justice Initiative, and I believe she was the one that did the research, and she pushed hard at the EJI to get this marker. And she was able to order the marker's production on her last day on that job. And we hope that she would be here. Yes, give her a round. She did, however, supply something to read, and since I don't have anything else to do, I will read it. Margaret Vinegar Marker Ceremony. Michaela remarks, "Hello everyone. I am so sorry that I cannot be there in person to celebrate this incredible accomplishment and memorial to honor Margaret Vinegar. I had the privilege of working closely with the Douglas County Community Remembrance Project Coalition during my time at the Equal Justice Initiative. We started this project to memorialize 3 Black men who were lynched in Lawrence in 1882. Peter Vinegar, Isaac King, and George Robertson. Upon further research, we discovered an essential piece of this story, Margaret Vinegar's story. Margaret was a young Black child who was sexually assaulted by a white man. Her father and her community came to her aid and defense. Her community acted for her protection, and as a result, her community was terrorized for daring to challenge the white supremacist culture that allowed white men to have control over the bodies of Black women and girls. During the era of enslavement, Black women and girls faced violence based on their sex and race. This unique experience of sex and race-based terrorism continued to shape the lives of Black women and girls far beyond emancipation. Margaret was charged for the murder of the white men who assaulted her, and instead of receiving the healing and justice for this crime committed against her, she was further criminalized by both the media, who justified the actions of the mob, and the criminal legal system, who sentenced her to die in prison. Before we can heal from the violence of racial terrorism, we must first be willing to admit the truth. This coalition has committed to telling the truth about what happened in this community. The truth is that Black women and girls continue to face violence based on sex and race, even today through gender-based violence in prisons and jails, to workplace discrimination and discrimination in healthcare. We know that lynching and racial terror violence has left a scar and psychological effect on Black communities across this country and around the world. The marker is a step towards the necessary reckoning that still needs to happen. This marker is the first step in acknowledging that there was harm here. The Vinegar family and this community experienced an unimaginable violence at the hands of white supremacy, and no one was ever held accountable for the violence and terror that they experienced. It is my hope that this type of reckoning and truth-telling continues far beyond this marker ceremony. It is my hope that through truth-telling, we can build a culture of repair that actively addresses past and present harms. Truth-telling and healing does not end with a marker, but this public acknowledgement and community coming together to honor a black girl who was failed by the system that was created to protect white people is a step towards creating that culture of repair. A commitment to a culture of repair requires acknowledging past harms to ensure that this type of failure never happens again. What are you doing to protect and empower black women and girls today? Margaret's story is the story of this community, and we all have a responsibility to never forget. Thank you all so much for your commitment to this work. I'll leave you with the words of freedom fighter Ella Baker. We who believe in freedom cannot rest until it comes.
Thank you for the opportunity to be involved tonight on this important occasion. My name is Annette Dabney. I'm a speech language pathologist in the Lawrence Public Schools, as well as a district and board level equity leader. After the Civil War, many white people sought to uphold white supremacy and use violence to reinforce racial subordination. Black women were killed in racial terror lynchings, and they also suffered the trauma of sexual violence. During the era of enslavement, white men faced no consequences for sexually assaulting black girls and women who had no legal protections.
After emancipation, black girls and women faced dangers based on their race and sex, just as they had for generations while enslaved. White men summarily lynched black men after, often false, accusations of sexual assault of white women, while they had also held tightly to the view that black girls and women did not have the right to refuse advances from any white man. Racial control through extra legal violence and racist laws that provided for different punishments based on the race of the offender and the race of the victim left black people vulnerable to the horrific abuse, especially black girls and women.
Local media contributed to tragic abuse of black people by making false reports and condoning mob violence. 14-year-old Margaret Vinegar was never described as a child who had been sexually assaulted, but instead was falsely characterized as a prostitute, adding to the outrage of her victimization, the plight of other black girls and women vulnerable to racial violence in this region.
In June 1882, two black men discovered a white man sexually assaulting 14-year-old Margaret Sis Vinegar. The black men who were living with the Vinegar family at that time came to Margaret's defense, and the white assailant was killed. Although she was just 14 and had been the victim of a sexual assault, Margaret was arrested along with her father and the two black men who rescued her. While in jail, she was terrorized by a white lynch mob that broke into the jail and debated whether or not to lynch her, ultimately voting not to by a majority of 1.
However, the mob did kidnap her father and rescuers and lynched all 3 of them on June 10th. Margaret remained in jail, and in October, she was tried for capital murder of the white man who sexually assaulted her. An all-white jury quickly convicted her, and her lawyers requested a new trial in another county. And in 1883, a second all-white jury convicted Margaret and sentenced her to her execution.
A local newspaper in Lawrence celebrated the conviction. Very little to surprise was manifest at finding of the jury, which is undoubtedly a just one. A few years after her conviction, Margaret died from tuberculosis in 1889 while incarcerated in Lansing. Decades after the era of enslavement, sexual violence against black girls and women was tolerated and unaddressed. Margaret Vinegar became a victim of this violence and the racial bias that punished all who resisted the horrors of this abuse.
Was it inspiring? That was heartbreaking. When you hear a story and then you hear all the facts, then you realize the story is worse than you could ever imagine. And I had to make those comments before I could ask you to join me in singing what we would call our Negro National Anthem. The last comment I would like to make. This would be awful if it happened to anyone. Anyone. Black, white, whatever race it was. But a 14-year-old who hadn't even begun to live. But often people reap what they sow. And I would have to hope that those that were quick to convict, quick to judge, and base it strictly on the times, I would hope they reaped. So thank you all, and especially the individual who was instrumental in getting Margaret. Because now that 14-year-old can live. Because people will see the marker and they will learn the true story. And there is justice. So I'd like to ask you all to stand. Lift every voice and sing till earth and heaven ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the darkness has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope
thank you. Second, I recovered. And I would simply say, I want us to just go back to that last verse. And I mean, I want to hear you sing it. God of our weary years, God of our silent tears, thou who hast brought us thus far on the way, thou who hast by thy might led us into the night, keep us forever in the path we pray, lest our feet stray from the places, our God, where we met thee, lest our hearts, drunk with the wine of the world, we forget thee. Sing it. Shadowed beneath thy hand, may we forever stand, true to our God, true to our native land. Thank you.
This has been a long, hard road coming here. But this presentation, what we've done here, has made it all worth it. And if you have a chance before it gets dark, might try going out to Potter's Field, where Pete Vinegar, Isaac King, and George Robertson are buried in Oak Hill Cemetery. If you're not familiar with the cemetery, you come in the west entrance and work your way all the way to the east entrance, to the east side. There's a hillside there with a few odd headstones on it, and the general area where their graves are marked is marked with a small red, black, and green Black Liberation flag. I would encourage you to go out there. I was out there early today, and it's not muddy, like it sometimes is. So no excuses. And before we close this and adjourn to the marker, we've done this at the other ones of our events, and it's important that we all say their names. This is the anniversary of the lynching. So we will say the names of all of them. Isaac King.
Isaac King.
George Robertson.
George Robertson.
Peter Vinegar.
Peter Vinegar.
And Margaret Sis Vinegar.
Margaret Sis Vinegar.
Thank you.